Sure.
Yeah.
Thanks everyone for joining in, both on LinkedIn and on Zoom. And welcome everyone to the Community Builder Workshop by Yuki. And today we have Edu from EWN. He's the head of community and author. Welcome, Edu. And over to you. I would like to know more about you and your journey in community building.
Yeah, sounds good. Thank you so much. And thanks for the invitation. Great to be here. I know that trying to do something post-pandemic that goes virtually and trying to get people's attention for 1 hour it's a burden on its own. So, appreciate whoever is here, pay attention to this. So yeah, I've been building communities and working with communities for possibly 15 or so years. Arguably, I built my most successful community was not the one I was planning on building on, wasn't one that I put a strategy behind. We can talk more about that. But I've come from several different companies where I had communities, Zynga, Dropbox, Wix, VMware, and so on. So yeah, excited to be here and talk more about communities.
Great. I think Zynga is one company we grew up playing all the mobile games. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, brought
Exactly.
poker back in the life for us.
I know. Yeah, we had a massive team I had managed teams in San Francisco and Bangalore.
Okay.
And they were growing so big and so large. It was amazing to see and success. And we had, I think at the peak time, we had 60 studios that we were heading. So it was quite a big operation.
Yeah, I think the Facebook game product worked very well for Zynga at that time, and it grew massively on top of that. Great.
Exactly.
So yeah, the session, we have these workshop monthly, and we bring in speakers to talk about sort of how they've been able to grow their community or a particular vertical they've used to grow a community. Today, we want to touch upon how is content important, and how much importance should we give to content, and how do we build an audience behind the content we produce, as well as then sort of use that to convert that audience into a community. So how do you get in front of your target audience, and what kind of content should you start with when you're sort of building out your audience, and what are the first steps? So any take on that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think content is such a broad term that we nowadays, especially when you say content, it can be a blog post up to an Instagram video or TikTok video. It can be literally anything that gives some information or some piece of information or excites someone or entertains someone or informs someone. It can be anything. And I have probably the best way I have to share, how do I do that? Imagine that we have this triangle, and then within the triangle, the base of it, which is the largest side of it, it's where you have the lowest level of, let's say, authority, but at the same time, the lowest level of effort that you have to make to put that content together. So I'll give you an example. Say that you're creating this webinar here, and then you invited me, and then you posted this on LinkedIn, and then someone who's watching us here today goes in and creates a piece of content, which is they will repost this webinar saying, this was a great webinar. So this type of content is it's content, right? Because they're kind of creating that content piece at the lowest or the most shallow level, which is okay. It's not bad, but that's what 99% of people will do. It's just that share, comment, that very baseline, type of engagement and content. If you kind of bring this to the second level, maybe you get someone here who is watching, say Victoria, who is here, she's watching it, and she's like, hey, I have my idea, and she'll kind of add information to that. She'll add in, so she'll bring more value to the existing content that has been created here. So that value that has a different level of expectation, different level of expertise, and a higher effort that she needs to put to make that happen, right? It's not that everyone will do that. Maybe 5% of people will do that. Great. But then there's the people what you're doing today, what we're doing here, which is the one who will stop, set up a time, organize a webinar, invite people, bring someone to speak, and actually generate content from scratch, which is what you're doing. That has such a level of complexity compared to just commenting on someone's existing content. Right. It's much more complex to make sure that whatever you're creating here has credibility, has validation, is making sense. So it's becoming that 1%, right? So first, so I wanted to make sure that we give this kind of like perspective first, because when we talk about content, it's very simple to create easy content that TikTok has enabled us for. That's essentially like copying someone, reacting to someone, remixing someone's content. That's easy. And that's why it has grown so fast. That community has grown really fast because they're essentially giving you tools to replicate fairly easy with low effort. Something that at the end of the day, it's shallow. So it's something that's not necessarily going to make someone change their mood. It's just going to make someone maybe laugh or just skip or fly through things. So that's the first point on that. And then when we talk about this 1%, which is what we're doing here, that's the point where we're like, how do I get people's attention, right? So now that I have produced this, I want to produce this 1% content here. I think there are two parts to that. There's no secret sauce to like, this is exactly how you steal people's attention. It's going to come, timing, the titles, the names behind, whatever it is will call attention. And a mix of all of this will get people's attention. But I think above all, it's just like, you're just gonna win. You're gonna score a goal if you keep shooting. It doesn't. If you don't try and shoot, you're not gonna score a goal, right? We're talking about World Cup analogy here. So if you don't shoot and goal, you're not gonna get the chances of you scoring a goal. It's probably
Yeah.
nil. So you need to shoot, and that's I think how you get attention. You keep doing it, and then you'll get someone's attention. And when you get that one kind of attention, you just grow from there.
Got it. And when you're just starting up, what is the expectation you should have in the beginning? I think is it just being consistent with your content in a particular niche, or
Uh,
you approach that, or just hit and try?
uh, that's a good point. And I think a lot of people will tell you like be consistent, upload it every day, create content, I don't know, once a week. But I disagree. I think you shouldn't be consistently bad. You have to be consistently getting better and then trying different things, because being consistently bad is not gonna help, right?
Yeah.
And I think this is happening a lot. So again, let's bring like a mix. What's the typical example of a company that wants to build leads or try to get people's attention? They'll create like blog posts with how to's. They will create series in webinars or boot camps or whatever it is. They'll try and create some cool testimonials, and that's totally fine. But then, if this is not well produced, if this is not helping anyone, if it's just for the sake of creating it, it's not going to make you move from A to B. It's not going to help you scale what you're doing. So it's really trying to think about other perspectives. I think I know Joe Rogan is maybe like an extreme example, but what I see a lot of companies doing really well, and I see this happening a lot with friends of mine based in Brazil that I really appreciate, admire their work, is that instead of just getting them, for example, let's say that Ankur, you're like someone who's building a business here, so you probably have ideas around other things that are not only about building businesses. So let's say that in my business is to talk about traveling abroad. You may have traveled a lot abroad to create your experiences, maybe to find fellow entrepreneurs and so on and so forth. So why not invite you to talk about what's your experience of living abroad? What's different from you? Or talk to you about how do you manage your finances, or how you manage, or I don't know, how do you raise kids? Bringing you out of your comfort zone, out of the like the expectation that people would have, like, oh, he's going to talk about building a platform. Maybe not. Maybe let's bring him to talk about something else. That unexpected kind of like end may get people's attention. So I feel that consistency is not necessarily the only thing, but really try something new, something that no one is doing. Let's do that playing poker, and at the same time we have to talk and challenge ourselves in doing that. I don't know. We need to be different.
Got it. I think originality is something we want to strive with, and in the particular vertical we are good at. If you find the right fit
Yeah.
in that quadrant, I guess you would be successful. I think we can go
Exactly.
to the next question. And sort of, if you're starting small, I guess it is difficult to get attention, both on social media, which is all the video platforms, to even blogs, right? Because bigger companies have more content writers on board, and even in videos, so they're able to push in more ads and more eyeballs to the videos. How do you sort of cut through the crowd, or sort of go ahead when when it's like a David versus Goliath kind of situation? Yeah.
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. And I like that you have this image of like using stories to inspire. I'm actually going to tell you a story. And I hope you guys know. And if you don't know, maybe it's something new you can learn. If you know it already, it's fine. There's a band that you probably know called Kiss. you're probably like 40 years old,
Yeah.
of existence, right? And do you know how Kiss became successful? Do you have any idea, or do you remember?
I am not sure. I guess you can talk about the story. Yeah.
Yeah. So essentially, what happened to Kiss was they were like just a bunch of teenagers, you know, had like fair cash here and there, but nothing really, nothing major. And they were not getting anywhere, right? They're just playing like small bars and not making anything, any big buzz. And then what they decided was like they had an idea. They were like, hold on, we want to be this big band. We want to be the biggest band in the world. How do we become the biggest band? People need to look at us and say, oh my God, who are these guys? What did I miss? So here's what they did. So they first of all, they bought all this makeup that you've seen, like the white faces, that like the crazy clothes that they have with like all this shiny stuff. They rented a limousine. They also paid the largest band that was making a lot of success at the time in their city, what they were, they were grew up. And they actually paid this band to open for them in the biggest venue of the city. So they rented the venue. They paid this big band that at the time was just a local band there to open this for them. They paid a lot of their friends and gave their friends T-shirts for like what's written down his to be on the front row and just start yelling like crazy, like yeah, oh my god, oh my god, and go crazy about that. So when the limousine would park, and people were like, "Who are these guys? Look at the fans!" And actually, this biggest band in the town are opening for them. They're gonna headline this gig in the biggest venue. Oh my god! And people just went crazy. A lot of artists, a lot of like journalists started to interview them, take pictures. They were in front of magazines, and suddenly they were famous. Suddenly, like it was overnight because they just created something that no one was thinking about. Obviously, they made it all up, like in the sense of like they paid everyone to be there, but it got their attention, right? So maybe nowadays people get lazy and like, oh, maybe I should spend on Google ads, maybe I should spend on Facebook ads. Why not try something crazy? Like, why don't you just get like, something? Don't you make like the next Kiss, band to go out there and be successful the way you are? So I love that. And I think this is
Yeah,
really
growth.
helpful.
That's growth hacking before growth hacking was invented. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So I
So
think this is it.
yeah. So another example is there's a movie recently called Everything Everywhere All at Once, which
Yes,
sort of
great movie.
like an indie movie versus a blockbuster, which is a Marvel movie, and they had a specific strategy in terms of marketing, in terms of doing the special effects. Though same producers, so I think the Russo brothers are the producers. So, but still, I guess you need to find your ways around in terms of the budget you have and in terms of the marketing you can do. Absolutely, they
Yeah,
were able to kill it, and I think they're among the top movies of the year. Going ahead,
exactly.
yeah,
And kind of
yeah,
like what you add to that, because you mentioned something that's really important. Because we're talking about content, and we sometimes people really drill down like my content has to be amazing, but the experience that kids brought to the people there was
yeah,
not about the content. So like the songs itself, the songs were
yeah,
really bad actually, but everything else was amazing, and people were like surprised by the visual elements, the makeup, the
yeah.
clothing, the lightning, the guitars, like the putting the tongue, spitting fire, everything that goes around. Like it's the Cirque du Soleil of the music. So that got people's attention in the 70s. It's not like, today maybe it's not going to be different, but back then it was different. So this is what I love about this.
Got it. Yeah. So it is all about the experience, even in a product or even in a movie or a rock band. So
Yeah.
yes, interesting topic to talk about. We can go on for hours. And the next topic would be how can you make your content more visual? I think what we mean is how do you imbibe storytelling in your content in a way so people are or users are engaged, and it can be sort of written content, blogs, or even videos. How do you sort of catch their attention? So I think it is extension of the topic we're talking about. How do you grab attention by being a very better storyteller in a visual content or a blog? So any thoughts
Yeah.
on that?
Yeah. This is again back to the kids story, and I'm gonna probably bring some examples from what I've done myself. I think stories is really what connects people. When I started EW, what I mentioned, I didn't know I was building a community. Was expected because of that. I was essentially moving abroad, and there was absolutely no information about Ireland in Brazilian Portuguese. I'm talking about 2007. That's a long time ago for a lot of people. So that back then there were absolutely nothing. Like there were no blogs. Instagram didn't even exist. YouTube was getting started. Maybe there were only cats and other things like in terms of videos. There was no like blog or anything like that. So what I did was maybe there's a way for me to start talking about what I'm experiencing here. And that was the key difference between going to the government website and reading the documentation and all the boring stuff versus what Edu's experience of being there. But what is it like? How does the chicken taste there? I don't know, is it really cold? Do you feel really cold? Are you really having fun? Do you understand what they say? Is the accent different? All of the little things that you wouldn't get elsewhere. Like the story is essentially me in my journey of being like a fellow Brazilian, just like my other Brazilian followers at the time, who were trying to figure things out, like, figure what's going on here. What can I do? Am I allowed to do this? Can I touch this? And it kind of brings that curiosity because people were following your journey. That's why Big Brother works really well. That's why novels and movies have this storyline. You want to see what's going to happen. You're like, what if it was me there? And they
Yeah.
want to position themselves there, right? So that's obviously when you start to expand and you're like, okay, this is Edu's version of this story, but what would that be if Ankur was there? What would he be feeling there? What would be his experience like? And this is extremely strong. I think this is probably the most strong way of approaching any type of content. This is why Bob Iger is back to Disney, because they want to bring back storytelling.
Yeah.
And this is definitely like the strongest thing you can do ever.
Yeah. Yeah, that's why we keep doing all these sort of series and all these franchises, because we are connected with the characters and we want a different take on that and we want to be part of that journey. And it's difficult to sort of build the next big franchise also, because
yes,
we don't get those characters now anymore.
exactly. Yeah, and absolutely. There's one thing that also I'd like to share. When I moved to Ireland, again back in Brazil, we speak Brazilian Portuguese. For those who don't know, it's not Spanish. And when I moved to Ireland, I didn't speak any English, and
Okay.
I didn't have a European passport, and I was not an IT developer or anything like that. But still, I was able to get a job in an advertising agency, and people are like, "How did you do that? How did you?" Because I also cannot speak English. I'm also non-European. I'm also not a developer. How did you get that? Because I want to follow your journey. And that gets a lot of attention. So going back to your first question when I mentioned, like, how do you get people's attention? They're like, you show that you're just an ordinary person like they are, like you're the underdog there as well, just like they would be.
Yes.
And you made it, right? So they're like, oh, it's possible then. I can do it. So
Yeah.
this is really important as well.
Yeah, you pick a character and put him in an unpredictable situation, I guess. That's a great plot for a great blockbuster. I think someone will make it up for you as well.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, we can move to the next question, Sneha. Yeah. So as we keep sort of doling out content, we sort of have a direction to take. How do you decide what do our users want? So in the long term, what do our sort of buyers would like? Is the right content for them? And how do you sort of fine tune your content or fine tune your audience for your content? So you can do both the things. So
Yeah.
either you change your direction or you change the user base. So how do you decide and how do you take a call on that?
Yeah. That's a great question, and I'm trying to bring back now to a little bit of the business side of things, and
Yeah.
perhaps that's a great example would be when I joined Dropbox. I joined when Dropbox had 400 plus million users, and there's an expectation when you join a company with that amount of users. They're like, hey, so this community is going to be huge, and we're like, well, not really sure, because just like Dropbox is a commodity, just like both of us wear glasses here, it doesn't mean that we're going to join the community of guys who wear glasses, because this is just a commodity for us. We're not really thinking too much about it. Dropbox runs in the background, which means that you don't care much about Dropbox unless it stops working. You don't care about your internet working unless it stops working, right? So you
Yeah.
don't join the community of people who have internet, because it's pointless. It's big enough that it's not a community, it's just
Yeah.
a thing, and it's a commodity. So when I joined, the challenge was exactly that. I was like, okay, so this is everything, like 400 plus millions users. So how are you going to create a community? Who is going to be in that community? What do they care about? Because they don't really care about anything unless it's not working, right? So
Yeah.
unless it's broken. I was like, well, so maybe this is the community. It's a community for people who can figure things out. Maybe it's a community for people who are seeing this broken and who care enough to come to us. And maybe we have someone to help them with that. So it
Yeah.
became a support community in the sense of people who would approach us would be people who had to learn something or they had something that was not working as expected. But this is important because first we had to create some sort of assumption, right? And then validate that assumption. And how do you validate that? You dig and you talk to people. For us was let me go and talk to people who raised customer support tickets in the last 3 months and ask them what were they looking for? What was the information? Did they find what they were looking for? What was the intention? What was the problem they're trying to solve? And give the curiosity and the fun fact is 70+% of these types of questions were questions that didn't need someone from the Dropbox team to actually answer them. They're questions that they could find on the internet. They could find if they Google it, or if they had a community. I was like,
Yeah.
maybe if we create this place for them to find this information and they don't need to reach out to support, maybe they will come back. Maybe they will grow and engage and find what they're looking for. And I know if you look at this today, it sounds really simple because everyone is trying to apply the same approach. That's
Yeah.
again 2014, right? So it's again looking at sometimes the simple things. So like, okay, maybe these are the questions that they ask the most. Maybe I will address this question in several formats and test them out. So let's say that this question that you sent me here is a question that you often get in your community. So you have this webinar, which is like the long form answer to that. Maybe you have like a blog post, which is an SEO driven answer to that if someone Googles it. Maybe you have a TikTok video of 30 seconds of that, which is just like a maybe a spark for them to deep dive more. Or maybe you have like an Instagram Reels, which is another way that's short enough, but also gets another audience that's not technical. Then you may have like a LinkedIn version of that you tag people, and then you get like a more business side of this question. You can try the answer in many different formats, and you're like, hold on, this format that's more business driven is getting me more leads, or this other
Yeah.
format that's a little bit more, it's a more shallow, yet it's getting me much more visibility. And the visibility is getting people interested in knowing more about what Uki does. Another day they want to find out what we do. We have a chance to get their attention. And then it goes back to your first question. So I think really when you talk about persona, I think it's much more about where are they hanging out, what kind of format will get them interested in engaging. And then once you get that, you go to the first point and like, okay, I now got their attention. Now it's up to me to figure out what's good for them.
Got it. Yeah, I think absolutely. I think the time Dropbox started growing, people, the tech team which were using sort of Dropbox wanted to have a voice and for themselves. So that sort of led to the whole community being driven out of the tech support, as you mentioned. The whole community can sort of help out in queries. They were available, but they didn't have a centralized place where they could sort of reach out to each other, help each other out. I think that would have been the right fit for them. I think finding the voice of the community is very important. So if you are able to find the voice of the community, I think on top of that, you can build out a community. Right now, I think people are forcing sort of communities on top of users. I think I don't know how that will pan out. Yeah. How do you measure success? I think, are you, do you want to say something? Yeah.
No, I was just agreeing with you, but yeah, go on.
Sure. I think as you grow up, people call it marketing campaign. You would say any experiment you want to do online with your community might not be paid, can be a growth hack, can be a sort of strategy. As you mentioned, there are different strategies to sort of solve something. How do you measure the success of anything you do online when you have limited data in terms of you're small, you don't have any data set, the tech team won't have all the analytics, you're not built out like a full-fledged Facebook team, you would be a small team. You would have to mix match data with intuition. So how do you sort of measure, and what is the sort of measure that is tending towards success in when you're doing any campaigns?
Yeah, I think this is a really, really good question because a lot of the times when we talk about communities, people tend to go on the more romantic side of the community of like, hey, people need to feel they belong and it's great and it's beautiful. But you need to have a business metric, otherwise it's not going to really play out. It's not going to be something that you're going to sustain. So there are a couple of things, and I think the joy of having my own business is that I had to figure things out without any kind of like strong analytics background or a data scientist helping me or anything like that. And then if you compare like in the counter, like with big companies I worked with, where they were like a team of data analysts, you kind
Yeah.
of like you can see that as much as you have access to a ton of data, if you don't know what to do with that, it's kind of pointless. Just like if you don't have any data and you have guts and you can like play with your guts and try things out and maybe measure one or two entry points there. So I'll share an example from eDublin and then talk about like
Yeah.
the big size, the big companies. But with eDublin, basic. When I started a campaign for an airline, I was like, I need to get this airline. I need to get them as a sponsor for our community because I think they're going to be great. Everyone who needs to move abroad, they need to fly. If they need to fly, they need an airplane. If they need an airplane, then airline would be the perfect match for us. Why not? So let's try and get them. And obviously, we know data. Like the data I had was like Google Analytics. I was like, hey, I have this amount of people who access my website and so on. And they're like, yeah, but that's not really fully conversion or anything that we can really measure and say that this is going to work or not. And I was like, so let me give it a shot. Like, let me try something out. And what I did was I created this Google form, like a Google survey, where I asked people, which company did you use to fly? And that was a simple question I asked. And I was able to get a percentage, right? So I got like, I don't know, at the time, 300 or 400 answers. I was like, okay, out of 400 people, this percentage of people fly your airline, which is quite low because if you look at the other four, they're pretty bad because the connection flights are longer. They don't speak Portuguese. They have this and these other issues. The immigration tends to be harsher for for us and so on. Yet they have a larger market share. Why? Because people know them because it's a word of mouth. If you go to
Yeah.
Brazil and I ask about your company, I'm pretty sure no one's going to know that you exist. Maybe if we run a campaign where we can start to promote you, create awareness, at some point we're going to be able to start to convert people. And they're
Right.
like, oh, okay. So my first point there was my data there was market share. I figured this out in the simplest way and maybe the most unscientific way because I wasn't sure if this was statistically significant at the time. But then I was like, okay, this can work. So we ran another survey in a broader spectrum. We looked at like different sources. We got more people in, we got the percentages, and then we start to promote them. And I was like, I'm gonna promote you for free. All I want you is to give one flight ticket. So I can record a video of me flying and using your airline. And I did that. So I did this campaign where I created a video like, hey guys, this is how you fly from Brazil to Ireland through this airline. And then I went through all the journey, showing them like what's the food like, what's the gate access like, how easy is it? Because sometimes people really need the basic things. They're like, what does it look like in the airplane? Or what does it look like in the international area of departures? Because I don't know, I haven't flown international yet, and that's very common in Brazil. So you got to all these details, and that helped them so much because I was showing them the basic things that I knew I would have as a question. Right? It wasn't like a guide of how to fly. It's more like this is your experience flying. This is where you go on. If you turn left here, there's a toilet, and if you go straight here, this is where the lady is waiting for you to show the passport. And all you have to do is show your passport and show your boarding pass. That's it, and then they let you through. And simple things like that, the people really like. They use that as their like, this is the video I have to watch when I fly. And they really got interested in this company. They were like, now that I know this is how this company works, I'm not gonna take a risk and choose another airline because it's too risky, not knowing what's the gate like or what's the experience like. So
Right.
that made us increase their market share because what I did is like after 1 year, I ran the same survey and they were like, oh my God, this market share is growing. Let's do another campaign like this. We did it again and then we start to grow. And 5 years later, they start to pay us to then not only give us flight tickets, but pay us to be present in our content throughout the year because they knew this was driving market share. So again, when we look back at like a successful marketing campaign, the only metric I had there was market share in the probably most known statistical way, but yet it made the point. It made the point, and that's what you need. Are you able to make a point and validate that point you're making? And they did it, and they start to sponsor us for years to come. And that to me is an example that sometimes having too much access to too much data is not necessarily what you need. And
Yes.
then if you look at like companies I work with, it's exactly the opposite. Where like they had all of this data, and you're like, okay, all of this is great, but then how can you attribute success to this? We're like, well, we can't because the user has touched this other 400 entry points, so we can't say that this is attributed to community or whatever. I'm like, see, so you overcomplicate sometimes. So I would
Uh,
look at like what metrics you have control and you can access.
So I think hitting the right tune or hitting the right sort of nail in terms of metric is very important. That was market share. That is extremely important for any product which is growing,
Yeah,
especially for a layered line, right? This can be measured every year. If a campaign has an effect on it, and you can directly attribute that, there's nothing, nothing better than that. Talking about, I think
exactly.
this was about your personal experience. How was sort of the marketing campaigns you ran with, say, a bigger gaming company, Zynga? Any sort of take on that? And yeah, how does a bigger company go about this? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So there are several ways, and obviously, when we talk about marketing, it can be as broad as a full 360 campaign, or it can be something that's specific to a niche. Do you want to create something out of it? I think that the best thing that I can bring as a good example would be campaigns where you have like a very clear intention. What's the goal behind this? Which is not awareness or anything that's too vague. You want to make sure that you get something specific. So an example would be, I'll try and bring an example that's not from Dropbox, maybe from Zynga, but Zynga was early in the days. But one of the things was, how do you get more people in the game, right? So how do you cross promote game? How do you get them excited about this? So one of the easiest ways is, when you're playing a game, usually what happens, and I'll really simplifying here, but when you play a casual game, is you don't want to run. First, you don't want to feel stupid that you have to learn and like be lost in what's going on. So the
Yeah.
game has to be the easiest possible when you start to get you excited, but not so easy that gets you bored, right? So
Yeah.
there's a challenge there. And then second is, you don't want to get to a point where you're just frustrated because you can't get through, or you block because you don't have, I have to pay, or I have to get more points, or I have to collect whatever items. And just don't want to feel that become a burden for you initially, because initially, like, getting the habit of getting started there. So what we were always doing that worked really, really well for us was, if you play, for example, Farmville was one of the biggest games. So we launched Cityville, which is the city version of the Farmville. We wanted to get people excited about it, right? So we're like, hey, so if you plant these crops here and all this in your farm that you already have established, this is going to return into experience points and extra points that you can use in your city, in the
Yeah.
Cityville. And if you invite someone from your farm to join Cityville with you, that will give you this extra item, which is this tower that no one has access to. This is only given to people who brought a friend. Or if you, and really, like, this small items to get people excited to get started was always working well for them, because we knew that people, like, if we talk about Farmville, and people, it's not necessarily that they want to build a farm, it's that they want to take care of something that they can follow. And it's not like it's so much that they have to stop everything they're doing, but really something that they can go in, like, 5 minutes in the morning, 5 minutes lunchtime, 5 minutes in the evening, and they can see progress. So when you have something that shows them progress, they'll follow. So that's why Cityville worked really well. That's why other games work really well, which is also why Fishville, which is another game about having a fishbowl, didn't work, because it's no progress. It's just feeding the fish, and that's not progress. Your fish keeps eating, and then they get fat and die. It's like a Tamagotchi. There's no kind of progress. The fish wasn't really progressing much in there. Where in the farm, where in the city grows. The city has more
Yeah.
habitat. The city has trouble, different problems. The fish is always like, he's hungry, we feed him, we fed, okay, great. Next day, he's hungry again. It's like a linear experience. So I think the experience there is really like trying to get things that people feel there's a progress, and low burden, low effort for them to join.
Got it. Yeah, I think a lot of us have spent productive time on Farmville on Facebook.
Yes, yes. The one
Sending.
thing I used to say as well, but yeah, just to add to that as well, is, and that happened a lot. Like, I give you an example of Dropbox. Dropbox is a simple enough product to get started, right? Or any of the games are usually very simple to start. And sometimes what I see is that people build communities that are harder to use than the actual product they built. So sometimes, like, our initial community when I started with Dropbox, I have to say that was harder to sign up to than signing up to Dropbox. And they're
Yeah.
like, "What's the point?" And I was like, "Yeah, we'll have to figure this out. We have to get this to be seamless. It has to be easier. It can't be like you go to a place to get help on your product. It's harder to use than the product. It has to be easier."
Yeah.
So it's a point on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So any add-on to the existing product, which can increase your reach, has to be simpler, right? Then only it works. Yeah. So there are different means of creating content. I think we've seen the blogging era. There was Google, your own personal blog, Medium, Facebook, LinkedIn. You were creating content on different platforms, and now videos with shorter, longer format. And I think there somewhere in between, podcast was there, and then it came back, and it is popular now, both audio and video, and people like spending longer hours just passively listening to podcasts. So I think, what do you think is the winner, and how do you choose? A lot of things to do, and if you're a small team, what do you choose? And say also again, so if you're a big team, how do you approach this? Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. So I think first of all, yes, not only podcasting is taking over like the world, and audio casting, right, where people watch videos of the podcast, almost like a video
Yeah.
version of the podcast, really long formats, like 2, 3 hours, 4 hours, sometimes it's crazy. Um, but there's a point there. I think it's really there's a need for that. There's people who want to consume that, but I don't feel that the way it's being produced today, it's still to a point where it teaches us something new. It's more about people curious to hear someone they like, someone they're a big fan of, talk for long hours. It's like,
Yeah.
Joe Rogan is not teaching like how to create this module on, or how to create this query on SQL, and then he talks to a data scientist or whatever. It's not about that. It's not teaching people anything. It's just like, let me chat to this dude here. I don't know, I don't know, Dave Mustaine, the guitar player from Megadeth, to ask him about how was his experience when he started at Metallica and why is he pissed off and whatever. It's like it's a chat about the person's life. So personally, it's beautiful that this is happening and growing, but it's not serving needs that we have, out of the entertainment side of things. It's not really teaching you something new. It's just bringing curiosity and fun facts and things like that. So to your point, and like, what's the right channel? What's the right way of doing it? The ways in trying things out. I can't say this is the only way you should do this,
Yeah.
but you should think about, is this going to help me somehow? Is it going to help me, or is this going to just be a distraction? So maybe you could create like long form talks where you invite, I don't know, random people and talk about life, and maybe talk about kids and barbecue. But then you're like, is this going to help my business grow? Is this going to help, or is this going to be maybe people maybe like me, and maybe 10 years from now, maybe they will consider my product because they like me, and maybe it's too late. Maybe you invested too much on that. And you have to be more intentional when you do content, right? Like, what's the intent of what I'm doing here? For
Good.
who am I doing this? So that's the first thing. Then the second point to that, and I think blogging is not that, but today the problem is that SEO is the reason why people blog, right? So it's just to be on top results, which means that if you want to search, I don't know, what's the best community out there, the answer is going to come from maybe a ghostwriter from HubSpot who has like huge SEO, and is not someone who knows about communities or anything like that. They just happen to know about SEO. And this is really bad for us. It hurts a lot, which brings opportunities for curation of content. So that's why Substack and other platforms are growing a lot, because
Yeah.
people want to get curated content. That's why Medium was still successful. That's why Quora is still successful. People want to get curation of content. They don't want to just consume what's Google first result, because that's just SEO. That's not necessarily the best result. It's just the best SEO. So I think there are ways in how you can approach that. I think I still feel we haven't cracked in a good way how can you curate content that's really easy for me to digest, to a point where it's not broad enough. So give you an example. Community managers out there, a lot of them are creating this newsletters and creating curation of content. I'm like, yeah, cool. And they're like, how, best platform for community. And they're like, okay, I created this content where I interviewed a lot of people, and I curated this solution for platforms. And then I'm like, okay, great, let's see. And then first interview is a guy who's like a startup by himself and has no money, nothing. Is like, yeah, this is the community I use. I use Facebook. It's great for me. Like, okay, cool. And then second interview is like, this is the guy who owns the community team at Salesforce, and they have $2 million to spend per year. So they use this best platform, and they're like, this is the best platform for me. Like, great. This is not giving me anything. It's just curiosity. Oh, out of curiosity, that's how much they pay. Out of curiosity, this guy's platform they use. It's not giving me any solution. They're not creating that for me. They're like, okay, this is the platforms that people who have smaller teams, but they are trying to build internationally. They have to figure out multiple languages and so on. This is what they do. This is how they approach this and this and this system. This is how they process this information. This is what they struggle with. This is the other thing. Because at the end of the day, everyone is looking after at trying to look at what everyone else is doing to figure what's the best out of something. I
Yeah.
remember exactly this when I was interviewing someone at Asana, and they were like, "Oh, we actually wanted to see what platforms they use because we were thinking that back when I was at Dropbox because we were like trying to change it." And then 2 days later, literally 2 days later, someone from my team says, "Hey, I was doing some benchmark, and Asana has this great platform. We should maybe benchmark and use something similar." I was like, "They called us just 2 days ago asking us what we use because they want to change theirs." So no one knows. No one has the answer.
Yeah.
And this is the probably the beauty and the bad thing about it is that because no one has figured this out, the curation of content is purely just aggregation. It's not curation yet. So I
Yeah.
think we need to get better at this yet. And this probably could be a great opportunity for markets out there.
Yeah. So if you touch on anything around community building or in any topic, the first 20 results are absolutely the same content. The ranking on top is basically a person with who's done better SEO, has good domain authority. So they follow the same mechanism, which is taught on all these same rush to Ahref and do the same thing. Yeah. So yeah, I think that Substack having a social following and curating content around this is super important. That's why I think Spotify has been able to, and even to some extent, Twitter curates a lot of great content, which is short form, and even with the links they do. So having an authority in terms of what content to follow is important. And so you don't spend time going through a sort of number of content figure, which is better.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, yeah, so I think this must be one of the last question. Yeah, I think we were talking about SEO. Uh, Two questions in this. Does a company which is starting up, should they spend time in SEO because it'll take time, or figure out who's the right audience and then sort of probably go into creating content around SEO? Or do they spend time on sort of social media, or even a sort of just try out their solution with paid content, get on top of these keywords and figure out if this is the right audience, right? Because in the initial years, you're figuring out if you have the right fit for the customers. So is organic reach dead? I think so. We all know the answer to it. Secondly, is organic content worth creating for a sort of company that's starting up? Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And remember, like something that someone said just recently that I loved is like, is there any organic search results still happening? And the reason why we deep dived on that was obviously you will have the paid content that goes on top, and then you have the organic results at the bottom, but they're not organic because you're paying an SEO specialist to work on that. So it's not that you're paying Google, but you're paying someone to make that content go on top. So it's not organic in that sense, right? But taking that apart, because I think there's a whole debate on the organic in that sense. I think there are a few things here. If I was to answer this question to you 5 years ago, I'll be like, organics is a great way to do things, and I think the best way is collaborating with people who have some sort of audience that will connect to yours. And if you invite someone who's like, I don't know, an influencer within a specific niche that adds value to your community, and then you can add value back, this is a great way to do it, and this is how people can grow. But then if you have asked me the question now, I see that changing because people have figured that this is not paying their bills. Collaboration doesn't pay bills, doesn't pay the rent. And so sometimes what happens is we did this like campaign with Wix a couple of times. You pay someone who is an influencer in the design industry, for example, and they're like, hey, you want to create this and invite you to speak? And they're like, yeah, this is my fee for speaking. I was like, sure. So let's bring you in. Maybe he's going to share this, he's going to be excited. The guy didn't share a single thing. The guy didn't talk about anything elsewhere. And then I was like, oh, why not share? I was like, well, because you just paid for me to speak, not for me to share. If you want me to share, this is an extra fee. And or if you want me to do a follow-up, or if you want to use this recording, there's an extra fee actually, because I'm just giving you the fee for live version of me. I was like, whoa, okay, hold on. This guy's became professional. So this is happening more and more. Like, I mean, I'm seeing people in the industry who are like, well, if you want to negotiate with this and this and this person, you either have to give them part of the business so they're excited and they will promote it, or you want to give them like a high fee that covers all of these other aspects, which is not just being there, but really promoting it in their social, wearing t-shirts, whatever it is. So you need to really do like old style, back to paying, even though you're talking to someone who has, is an influencer just on the internet or just becoming like an internet celebrity. So I think there's that. And then the other opportunity you have is when we're talking about like the initial questions you made, it, you're creating constantly good content, not constantly bad content. And now you know that you're creating good content because it's getting more eyeballs, it's getting more people excited, people are engaging with that, people are really excited to discuss or debate on that or add value to that. You have to do, if it's not good, people are just consuming and leaving, it's just okay. If it's okay, maybe it's not going to grow, it's going to be stale. So having that may give you some chance that at some point someone likes it and shares that somewhere, that will get some attention. But this is much harder though, right? So this is harder because you have to expect and hope for someone to do that. So I think that the secret, or which is not a secret, it's the hybrid, right? It's a solution that's a mix of both. You keep working on your organic activities, but you have to find your influencers, people who, and when I say influencers, don't think about, I don't know, Justin Bieber. Influencers like who is in my industry here, or who can add value to my business here, that I can pay to be in. And within that payment, I can actually have that person be part of something, or I can invite this person to be a partner, like a business partner. This person will be like, here's like 0.5% of my business in exchange of you helping us grow, because at the end of the day, this is going to be good for you too. So it's changing a lot. I've seen this changing a lot. There are a lot of companies in Brazil doing like influencers who are like, I don't get paid for media anymore. It's equity in exchange of media. So you give me equity in the company, I will promote you because we both have an interest in them. And I was like, well, that's
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah, I've seen similar deals happening across the world now, and I think it suits both the creator as well as the company, which works. Yeah, I think I Google is now sort of the 20 sort of first 10 results are dependent a lot on how you can push your particular content or find a niche where others are not sort of pushing in at that time. So difficult to choose in a early stage company.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So how do you think? So usually when you're building a business and you think it's a exciting idea, you would have competitors. It might be existing ones. You're building a better version of the product, or you're going after a particular segment you think would grow massively in the next couple of years. So all the business usually work around these two ideas. So how do you look at competition and decide or pivot or even change course in terms of your strategy? Or is is what your competition doing important? And if yes, how do you stay up to date with that? And how much to look at competition in general? Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think that's a good way to kind of like bring us to like the ending and closing that. Um,
Yeah.
I would maybe challenge people who are going to be watching this, that I don't think that you will be able to create a strategy that's uniquely yours when you start and like just be like completely off competition. I think it's a bit naive to think that you're going to be, the next big genius out there. Maybe you are, and but you need to be the 0.1% of the world. And I think it's harder to do that than to just have like a unique value proposition, which is different. So a unique strategy, like what's the strategy? The strategy is to grow the business, to make money and sell more. Everyone's strategy is the same. Like, I mean, everyone wants to make more money, and everyone wants, I mean, maybe a few don't want to make more money, but a
Yeah.
majority that I know want to grow their business, want to have a community that's more engaged. So at the end of the day, it's like, what's the strategy? The strategy is building more engagement. The strategy is we want to grow this. We want to make this successful. We want to create more content. We want to make this content more valuable. Yes, great. But what's going to set you apart is your user base that sees you in a way that they don't see elsewhere. So why Apple phones are Apple phones, regardless of being technically worse than most Android phones? Because they're Apple, and there's a community around that. There's a status around that. Why Louis Vuitton purses are more expensive and more valuable and bring prestige versus a Primark purse? Because they bring the value. There's a value in the brand. There's a value in having that, a feeling that's better. There's we have to find what's this one something there that I have that will set me apart. And that one thing there is not necessarily something you're going to figure out in the strategy session. It's not going to be like you brainstorming by yourself or your team internally. It's really being there with your community, being there with your users, sitting with them, and hearing them talk. And this to me was the biggest value I got. So I run an annual event for EWM that's like around 1,000 people that joins. And then what I do is I walk around and just listen to them. I don't talk. I just listen. I'm just there, like listening to what they're talking about. Like, oh, look at that. And they see something, and they're like commenting. I'm like, oh, hold on. I haven't thought about that. They're like, oh,
Yeah.
look at this, blah, 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 blah. And then commenting about something very, very specific. Like, oh my God, I've never thought that this would be something they see value in. And to me, it was just like ordinary. I'll be just taking it for granted. So when you sit and listen, it just gives you so many insights. And I think this could be your strategy, like really being close to your community. I
Yeah.
think the best example would be Figma. Figma did this really well. They built this self-mode community. They would bring them to the office to eat pizza with them and talk about the product with them, but just sit and hear, like, what are you guys doing? What are you trying to figure out? You are the designer. I'm just the one building the product for you as a designer to have the best experience in the world. So tell me about the problems you have. How is Sketch working for you? How is Adobe XD work for you? And get, consume, and just build a product around that. And then we're doing that self-mode, but they built such a strong community with that, that when they went out to the world, there was no competition. Like they took over Adobe, they took over Envision, they took over Sketch. And then suddenly
Yeah.
Adobe had to figure out, okay, I have to buy this guy. There's no way I'm going to beat this competition. There's no way I'm going to beat that community. It's not the
Yeah.
product. It doesn't matter how good my product is. I don't have that community. I have to buy that. So I see this as being the biggest strategy.
Yeah, community is the next moat. I think the entire acquisition around Figma was around the community and the inability of Adobe sort of replicating that around theirs. Yeah, I think
Yeah.
thinking sort of tangentially different than a competitor is also important. And listening is a lost art, I guess. And even so, in terms of when you are loud and when you are there with multiple people, taking a step back and listening is very important for a community builder to understand what is happening. Yeah, I think yes. We can take one question, I guess, and if you have any further questions, we can you can comment on the LinkedIn page, and I think we'll take that after that. If there is any quick question anyone wants to ask right now, else I think Edu has a hard stop in next couple of minutes. Thanks a lot, Edu, for taking out the time to have a session with us. And we as a company, Yuki, are building an all-in-one community platform for creators and brand to help them set up a community in a simple and easy way to have discussion, events, polls in one place and integrate with your existing community platforms. Now monetize them as well. If you're a course creator or are selling content online or even selling goods and services, we help you do that both for Web 2 as well as now for Web 3 products as well. So do check our product. And Edu, I enjoyed listening to your take and your experience. Would love to have you again because I think this doesn't feel enough. And thanks for taking out the time to have the session with us. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for everyone who's either here or will be here listening in the future.
Yeah.
Hope you have a great day ahead. Thank you so much, and yeah, thanks for the invitation again.
Thanks everyone for joining in and all the people who are there watching on LinkedIn. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Bye bye.